Transforming the System from Mandated Reporting to Community Supporting. To discuss this particular topic, we have three incredible presenters with us: Jenny Perlman, Chief Policy Officer at Safe and Sound; Jason Sharp, Fatherhood Engagement Specialist with the County of San Diego; and Luciana Vindler, Director of Policy and Training at the Children's Law Center of California. And with that, I want to pass it over to Luciana to kick us off and say thank you all so much for being with us. We're really looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Jessica, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to start us off. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Making sure we're working here. Okay, are we all good to go?
That looks great.
Perfect. Great. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Luciana Svidler. I'm Director of Policy and Training at Children's Law Center, California. I'll let the others introduce themselves when it's their turn to speak, but just a quick little background. CLC, we are the court-appointed attorneys for children and youth in foster care in LA, Sacramento, and Placer County systems. In addition to our in-court representation, we engage in legislation and policy actions here in California, some nationally. And personally, I became involved with mandatory reporting and the issue of mandatory reporting back in, 2022 was a bill I helped with, AB 2085, which we will be discussing later in the training. But the work started, as you all know, work on those areas. When you work on a bill starts before that time. And then I was able to participate in the statewide task force, which is what we're going to cover today. I co-chaired a subcommittee of the task force, which dealt with the legal definition of general neglect. So that is my background and connection to the work. The three of us, the three presenters, were very involved with the task force, and I'll let others explain their role. But we're here to talk about the work California has been doing in the area of mandatory reporting. So really quickly, today we're going to cover mandatory reporting, why it matters, what the work that's been done throughout the last some years that have led to the creation of the task force. We want to share about the task force, the creation, and the final recommendations and report of the task force. And finally, we want to talk about moving forward, what it looks like, what the work looks like, what's happening now, and give folks an opportunity to get involved in the work if they're interested as well. We will try and save some time at the end for questions and answers. So feel free during the presentation to drop your questions in the questions and answers. And we will try and go through them at the end and also leave kind of open space for things that might come up. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jason to talk a little about why this work matters.
Hello, my name is Jason Sharp. Currently, I'm a fatherhood engagement specialist with the County of San Diego. But previously, I've done a lot of case management. My history is in case management of child welfare. And before that, I'm a father with lived experience in San Diego County in the child welfare investigation, and also had a case in San Diego County. This matters. I felt like my life was going great. Things were going very well. And I had a knock at the door. And I participated. Hey, come on in. Let's get this thing cleared up. And it changed my life. It changed my career trajectory. It changed my family. It changed everything. So it really matters because we need to focus on prevention. We need to move forward into a way where people aren't experiencing trauma, where we can lighten the load of the system and move forward. Next slide, please. Right here, you'll see a lot of quotes. Some are based on lived experience. Some are based on the thought process of moving forward. also just with the general concept that families are the experts at how to keep themselves safe, protected, and home. So it's very important. You can take the time to read it on your own, but it's very important. Everyone has a story in this task force. We got to experience a lot of different stories and perspectives from a wide range of fields where we all come together to deal with this humongous problem that I had no idea of until, I got a ring at the doorbell. Next slide, please. Oh, well, this one we're going to do a poll. What is the number one allegation reported? So I think a poll might have popped up on your screen, and you can go ahead and put your thoughts there.
Looks like we have about 68% participation. I'll give people a second to answer that before we close this poll out. All right, we're looking good. Give you about another 5-6 seconds here. I'm ending the poll and I'm going to share the results now.
Okay, we have some well-informed people here. General neglect, 71%. So general neglect is the number one allegation. It's generally used as a catch-all that can pretty much catch anything. In my situation, I definitely was accused of general neglect. And really, in my situation, it was my reluctance to call the police. Culturally, the police in my neighborhood never really made things better. So in these situations, where I wasn't really the subject of the investigation, I wasn't the primary subject, I didn't think that calling the police would make my life any better. And I thought it would make it worse and also a danger to my family. And if you are familiar with the climate in the country a few years ago, having 8 officers at my door just didn't really seem like something that I would do as a protective parent. So fortunately, things have changed. I've talked to county council and things like that. But general neglect, it's similar. If you're not familiar, it's similar to obstruction of justice. It's kind of a way that you can just, oh, someone's blocking me from doing my job, or someone isn't doing a good job as a parent, and no real detail. Next slide, please. So in California, I think it might be one more slide after this one. Yes, in California, 25% of white children. We can see this slide that shows that the number is far lower than 50% of Black and Native American children who may have an investigation. And once having a child welfare investigation or a case is very taboo. It's not something you talk about. But once it happened to me and I started to talk to friends and different scenarios that I remember happened in people's lives that would cause a child welfare investigation. Once I started to talk to friends and family and colleagues and neighbors, it really exposed that we were all suffering in silence and going through different things and never really talked about it. So definitely being a part of the task force was my very first time speaking out about these issues in a public forum. But it was kind of easy. The process of going through a child welfare investigation is like stripping your family naked. So it's kind of it's pretty easy to be vulnerable and come to these spaces to make more people aware and knowledgeable about what's actually going on. Next slide. And also in the I forgot there was a graphic briefly. That's the current population of San Diego, 5.7. And another fun fact, we just reported reports just came in that in the past 3 years, Blacks are 7 times more likely to be arrested by San Diego Police Department as well. So we're not here to discuss the reasons why, but I'm very, very happy that the discussion about systemic racism and different systems and different reasonings why, adverse child events, different reasons why that Blacks have a different experience, as far as child welfare and law enforcement. Next slide, please. This is really, really important. The additional harms of mandated reporting, definitely the fear for asking for support, the fear for reaching out for resources, going to medical care, seeking out help when you need it, that fear of things going left and ending up with an investigation or a case. I definitely was traumatized by the system. There's a stigma. Think about if someone says, "Oh, you had a child welfare investigation." Even working in this field, being a parent partner, you don't get to come work somewhere and be anonymous. You come into a workplace where if somebody works, looks up your job title. Oh, you had experience with child welfare. Red flag. What does that mean? Have you been in jail? Have you been on drugs? Have you hurt somebody? So these are the things that come up just based off of having an interaction, a documented interaction with the system. So with that, my case, I didn't need that much interaction with the system. I needed some information, and we could have gone our separate ways. So with that, I feel like the system is overburdened. When we talk to workers, we talk about turnover, we talk about their caseloads. But children are still being removed, even though these things are a constant issue for the child welfare system itself. Next slide. So, seizing the moment. We're gonna go into talking about the task force and how it was formed, and why it's so important, and why we have momentum now to move forward and lessen the trauma for our families and move our communities to supporting over mandated reporting.
Thank you, Jason. So Jason covered the importance of the issue and why it's something that California, along with other states, are looking at the current state of mandated reporting. And we are going to talk about the task force and its creation, but I just want to make clear that the task force was one of several movements. It was, I guess it was part of a bigger movement that has been happening in California and again, throughout the country, to reform mandated reporting laws and the policies throughout the state. So just to give you a little background on things that came along the way before the task force and with the task force that led to ultimately the creation and the final report. We have in 2018, the federal government passed the Family First Prevention Services Act. And we can do a whole training on FFPSA, so we won't go there. But for those of you who don't know, FFPSA was really one of the first steps that the federal government took, opening the doors to provide preventative services and to really get upstream before families come into the child welfare system. So helping to fund services before child welfare involvement. And then we have the Prevention and Early Intervention Committee of the California Child Welfare Council. So California has what's called the Child Welfare Council. It's a statewide body that meets quarterly up in Sacramento. The meetings are public if you ever want to tune in. And it has representation from all different areas. One of the subcommittees of the Child Welfare Council, the PEI committee, their emphasis is on prevention and early intervention. They're the ones who have helped to develop the California's Family First Prevention Services Act plan. And they also issued a set of recommendations that were presented to the Child Welfare Council on preventative services, along with the recommendation to actually create the task force. So it was their recommendation that led to the passage of the creation of the task force by the Child Welfare Council. Then in 2022, California passed AB 2085, the bill that I had mentioned earlier on that I participated in. How many of you, and I'm curious, because we know that bills are great and legislation's great, but it's only as good as people implementing it and knowledge on the ground. So just another quick poll for you. I would love to know if you're familiar with AB 2085 and how familiar you are with 2085. So I'll give you all a couple minutes to answer that question.
People are submitting their responses now. We're at about 50%.
Great. I love that I get to submit an answer too, by the way.
And this is anonymous, y'all. Just so you know, you could be as honest as you want. Okay. I will stop this poll in just a few moments.
And if you're not familiar yet, you're going to be familiarized with it by the end of this training.
That's right. I'm ending the poll now, and I'm going to share the results.
So 44% are not familiar at all, and 29 a little bit familiar. So those numbers are not surprising, even though they're a little painful as someone who worked on the bill. But again, we know, those of us who work in legislation and policy know it's great to pass laws, but if people don't know about them, like they're not as useful. They don't meet their full extent. So part of the work of the task force and others is also to raise awareness of about the laws and changes in law. So 25 passed in 2022 when Governor Newsom passed the bill that changed the legal definition of general neglect. So it added language that economic disadvantage alone is not a reason to report a family. So a family's lack of economic resources does not mean that there's general neglect, and therefore they do not need to be reported to the Child Protection Hotline. The other big thing that the bill did is it now requires that there be a substantial risk of harm to the child for someone to be mandated to make a report. So not only does there have to be some kind of neglect, general, severe, or of abuse, but that neglect has to lead to a substantial risk of harm to the child. This is one of the first changes in mandatory reporting laws in California that kind of started narrowing a bit the definition of general neglect. If you saw the definition beforehand, even if we look at the definition now, it's pretty broad, which not surprising. Jason mentioned earlier that general neglect is the #1 reason to report, and it's a really broad category. Because the definition is so broad, it catches a lot of things. So we have mandated reporters, such as some of you here on the call, that are mandated to report these cases, whether we think they should be going to Child Protective Services or not. So in addition to that legal change, we have some reports that have come out in the last couple of years that also support that look at the flaws in our system of mandated reporting and have recommendations themselves. You wouldn't be surprised if you read them that they're pretty much aligned. There's nothing, everybody kind of is on the same step as far as where the disparities lie. Safe and Sound, the organization my co-presenter Jenny works with, issued a report back in 2022. The Citizens Review Panel issued their recommendations in 2022 as well. And finally, the Legislative Analyst's Office, the LAO's office, that's the office that consults the governor's office on kind of financial and budgetary issues, issued a report on California's child welfare system that addresses disproportionalities and disparities in general throughout the system, but also took the time to really focus on the really front end of the system, which is mandated reporting. So that's what led to the actual creation of the task force. I'm going to pass it over to Jenny now to talk about the creation of the task force and how it came about.
Thank you so much, Luciana. I'm Jenny Perlman. As Luciana mentioned, I'm the Chief Policy Officer at Safe and Sound, which is a community-based organization in San Francisco that's been around for over 50 years with a mission to prevent and reduce the impact of child abuse and neglect. Our work ranges from direct services with children and families to community education work, to systems change on the local and state level and policy change. And I have the opportunity to work in that area. And as Luciana mentioned, in 2022, we, took this momentum that was going on in California and across the country and pulled together a report, which we're very excited helped to support in California the creation of the task force. And I sat in the seat of Family Resource Centers since we are a Family Resource Center and have a coalition of 40 plus family resource and family support organizations in San Francisco. And I also co-chaired the legal and liability subcommittee for the task force. So we talked a little bit, about what was the catalyst for creation of this task force. And I'm just going to go very briefly over how did we form this task force and what did its composition look like. There was a very expansive application process, and the goal was to distribute this to a very diverse group of potential applicants so that we could get diversity of voices in the task force. And the task force is one of a kind in terms of pulling together cross-discipline representatives. So we had over 250 applications and 32 task force members were chosen from that, as well as 78 subcommittee members. The task force launched in September of 2023 after this robust application process. And then you'll see this intention of engaging in this slide. You see engaging a very diverse and expert group of people. We were successful in that. And we really wanted to focus on ensuring that representatives had lived experience. As you heard from Jason, the importance of making sure that people with lived experience were at the table to help us co-create our recommendations. And also to ensure that we had a lot of representatives who had proximity to the mandated reporting system, whether that was advocating to change that system, whether that was as mandated reporters, or having experienced a report with lived experience. So we were proud that we ended up, you'll see the statistics here, but with 88% of the members who had worked in or had personal experience with the child welfare system. And again, that 28% of the task force members had lived experience. And you'll also see here that there was, in order to ensure that diverse voice, we had a diverse composition of race and ethnicities represented through the task force members, as well as regions of the state. There were 11 different counties represented on the task force and also 7 different types of professions. Next slide. This same goals of having a diverse set of subcommittee members were at the forefront in determining who would be members of the subcommittees. And similarly, of the 78 subcommittee members, they brought both racial and ethnic diversity. They also came from 24 different counties across the state. Again, we wanted representation from different parts of the state, from small and large counties, from urban and rural counties, and we were able to, the task force had that. Also, you'll see here the stats that of the subcommittee composition similar, about 79% had worked in or had personal experience with the child welfare system, and 25% had lived experience. We also had a majority who were mandated reporters. So really had experience with what is it like to make a mandated report? What do we need to be thinking about? What gets in the way of making a report that doesn't have bias come into it? Jason showed you some of those statistics, and we know that at the front end, there is a huge disproportionate impact on Black and Native American families. Next slide. Now I want to move into the recommendations from the report, and each of the presenters, we're going to go over some of these recommendations. I just want to start with the strategic priorities and the North Star of the task force, because the recommendations tie into each of these. The North Star, you can read it here, but I want to pull out some key things. The goal here, and it's really shifting that perspective, it is not what is wrong with this family and we need to, remove the child from the family. It's how do we keep families together, ensuring safety for the children in those families. And also key of this is keeping those families together with what they need to be able to thrive. So we know, and you'll hear a little bit about this in the recommendations, but parallel to narrowing this front door to child welfare, to reforming the mandated reporting system, we need to build a system of community supports, because we know that families may be experiencing some challenges and they know they need the supports, and we need to support our mandated reporters with how do they connect families with those supports. So strategic objectives, strategic priorities. There were 5 of them. The first one is really that piece that I just highlighted there about the ensuring that we gather the necessary data to really help us to focus on why is there a disproportionate representation of Black, Native American, and Latino families in the child welfare system, and how do we reduce that? Second priority is to address those questions about what does it mean? What are we supposed to report? The definitions are very unclear. And Luciana talked about AB 2085 that was trying to clarify general neglect, that it shouldn't include a family's economic disadvantage. So that's the second priority, to really focus in on those definitions in the Child Abuse, Neglect, and Reporting Act and make them clearer. The third is to look at the laws, policies, the training with respect to mandated reporting, and to make sure that those do not have elements in them that might encourage over-reporting. So one thing, an example of this is the issue of liability for mandated reporters. And we hear so frequently, there was a research done in LA County with educators, but we hear how mandated reporters, that fear of liability compels mandated reporting, even in cases where there's, significant questions on the part of the mandated reporter, whether this family needs that, whether there's any safety risk. And they're really just that family needs support, but because of that liability, that may encourage that report. The fourth strategic priority is to address training and make sure that mandated reporters have the information. Not to address training, but it's addressed training and addressing that piece around resources. So to ensure that mandated reporters have the information and the training about how to connect families to those resources. So, in neglect is the highest reporting allegation, which you all knew, many of you knew, is very highly correlated to poverty. And so we want to ensure that a lot of times it is not a safety issue, but that it's the family needs support. And so we want to ensure that mandated reporters know how to connect those families to those supports. And then the last strategic priority is we know this is going to be a multi-year effort that's going to take some time. And so we really were hoping to get the state to commit to ongoing reform, which you'll hear the state has committed to. So we're excited about that. These strategic priorities fell into kind of 5 different levers for change in our recommendations. The first is data and accountability. Second is addressing legislative changes in policy. Third, training. Fourth, building that community pathway of providing the necessary supports for families and connecting the mandated reporters to those. And then the last is changing that that narrative, right? Changing that narrative from we need to make sure children are saved from their families to how do we keep families together in a safe situation. First lever of change here relates to data and accountability. And the first thing that is necessary to oversee this process of reform is to set up a committee that will oversee it. And so the recommendation from the task force was to establish a committee called the Mandated Reporting Advisory Committee, which the acronym we are using is MRAC, or some people are starting to say MRAC, so you'll probably hear both. And that committee really to oversee and ensure the transformation of the mandated reporting system over this multi-year effort, and the implementation of the task force recommendations, to really make sure that we address that core issue of those core issues of over-reporting and disproportionality in the mandated reporting system. In order to be able to do this, it's also recommended that we really take a deeper dive into the data, and so work with the California Department of Social Services to gather and disaggregate the necessary data to inform us of what is, what's happening here, what's going wrong, what do these general neglect cases really look like? What are the supports that the families really need, or should safety come into the system? And then finally, in this area of data and accountability, as we talked about, is ensuring the implementation of AB 2085, which Luciana talked about. And so we're also so glad that over 100 of you are on this call so that we can continue to educate mandated reporters and others in the field about those changes through AB 2085. And now I'm going to turn it back to you, Luciana.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. So I'm going to talk a little about some policy recommendations. So recommendation number 4, and if you didn't catch it earlier on, there was the QR code for the report that you can look up. I believe our partners at Caltron we're going to put it in the chat as well, and it's available in the last slide. But all of this is available online, so you can actually kind of take your time to read it thoroughly if we go through it too fast. But the report is available. The report also includes like a whole beginning section with background information, statistics, everything we kind of talked about as well. So it's a very well put together report, which I won't claim too much responsibility for. So recommendation number 4 is in alignment with the LAO's report, which I mentioned earlier. And the report was called California's Child Welfare System Addressing Disproportionalities and Disparities, to encourage the LAO's office to continue to analyze the disparities in mandated reporting, specifically, and to determine if narrowing the categories of mandated reporters in CANRA would negatively affect child safety, or it would be okay. So a couple big words here I just want to digest for you. CANRA, so the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act, is a section of the California Penal Code that really lays out the laws for mandated reporting, who's the mandated reporter, what they're required to do, the liability piece, all that stuff. So you can find that in the Penal Code, and it's known as the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act. So CANRA has a whole list of mandated reporters. If you're not familiar with it, there are over 40 groups of individuals who are considered mandated reporters in California. So the question is whether this category of individuals should be shortened or not. Some of them you'll see when you read the list are well known, not shocking, that educators, medical personnel, law enforcement, but there's a whole list of other folks who are also considered mandated reporters. Recommendation number 5 is to support the amendment of CANRA to remove the reporting requirement of general neglect for mandated reporters. So again, under CANRA, the current laws for mandated reporting, mandated reporters are required to report instances of general neglect, severe neglect, and child abuse. AB 2085 tried to change general neglect to narrow the definition, but the task force is now recommending that an amendment be made once again to CANRA, and to remove the requirement that mandated reporters have to report instances of general neglect. So this would mean that they wouldn't, if a mandated reporter sees an instance of general neglect, they could call it in, but they're not required to call it in. So again, this is a recommendation, and it's actually a recommendation that if it were to happen, it would require a legislative change. So that means someone would have to do a bill, it would have to go through the legislative process here in California and eventually be signed by the governor. So it's a recommendation, but it does require legislative change if it were to happen. Recommendation number 6 is to support, once again, an amendment to CANRA and to revise and clarify the definition of severe neglect to be aligned with the definition of severe neglect that's utilized by the structured decision-making tool. So I'm wondering if you can put in the chat like a little emoji or reaction if you know what the SDM tool is or if you've seen the SDM tool. So as it stands now, CANRA has a definition for general neglect, a definition for severe neglect, and a definition of abuse. If you look at the definition of severe neglect, it doesn't quite align with the definition that's currently used in the California Structured Decision-Making Tool. And for those of you who know or don't know about SDM, and we're going to put a link in the chat to California Department of Social Services SDM website. There's a whole site on the definition of structured decision-making and a lot of information. It's basically a tool that has been developed that's used by all counties here in California to do all kinds of things, including looking at risk assessment for families and providing support for families. That decision-making tool is used by the child welfare agencies throughout California at the hotline level and throughout the life of a case. But it doesn't necessarily match with the very front end of what mandated reporters are doing. So again, the recommendation from the task force is to try to align those definitions. So we're really doing the same thing at the very end of this front end of the system as we are coming into the system and throughout the system. So everyone is kind of aligned of where there's a need, what the need requires, and how you're going to address that need. Recommendation number 7 is to encourage CDSS, the California Department of Social Services, in collaboration with MRAC and the counties to implement a 2-year pilot that provides mandated reporters with immunity from liability. So as Jason mentioned early on, one of the issues that has been identified with mandated reporting, not just in California, but in other kind of studies and reports that have been issued in other states, is the concern with liability. We have done listening sessions with mandated reporters who oftentimes will say they have a child in front of them with a definite need. They don't necessarily feel like Child Protective Services is the way to go to address those needs. But because of the fear of liability, of having to report, they default to reporting regardless, instead of taking a different route, such as connecting them to services in the community to provide supports. This liability loss actually can be found in the penal code for criminal liability, and it can be found in other code sections for civil liability. Like, for example, if you're an educator, there's some liability laws in the education code. If you are a medical provider, in the business code. So one idea is to run a pilot removing liability to see if that changes at all the cases that are getting reported in, and also outcomes. This is again one of those things that would require legislative change because liability is already in the law. So if you're going to remove liability for, even if it's just a pilot program, it does require legal change. There is currently a bill pending that touches on this, and that would be a pilot program in LA County, which I'm happy to provide more information on to folks if they're interested later on or offline. The other lever I'm going to cover is training. Again, one of those other areas that we've seen are really troublesome in mandated reporting. California, as it is, doesn't have a standardized training for mandated reporters. Mandated reporters are often getting training by their own employer or provider. And there's also a lot of categories of mandated reporters who are not currently required to be trained in their professional role. Some are by their own, again, educators under the education code are required to be trained, but not all are required to be trained, and there's no standardized trainings out there in general. There's, a handful maybe of trainings that folks would consider adequate to cover everything, but otherwise they tend not to cover a lot of very useful information. Trainings also often happen to be developed by insurance companies to address the issue of liability. So we find that, for example, hospitals, the training they provide their mandated reporters or hospitals have been developed by insurance companies to ensure that they are not held liable for not reporting. So they definitely tend to have that angle. So to address those concerns, the task force issued a few recommendations. Recommendation number 8 is to amend CANRA once again through legislation to require that all mandated reporters in California receive a standardized training on child abuse and neglect. And there is also, along with this recommendation, there is current legislation pending addressing training in California, which I'm also happy to provide information on. Recommendation number 9 is to require CDSS and specifically their Office of Child Abuse and Prevention, the wonderful people who put on these webinars, to develop, with participation of individuals with lived experience, a standard curriculum for mandated reporters. So if you don't already know, if you go on the CDSS website, they already do have mandated reporter training on their website for different groups of mandated reporters. So there's, you can click if you're an educator or a social worker, law enforcement, and there is a standardized curriculum. There is a curriculum there. It's not required. It also has been a bit since it's been updated. So the recommendation is for a work group to get together to update this curriculum and to make it available on their website. And some work has started in this area as well, which we'll talk about later. Recommendation number 10 is to encourage CDSS in collaboration with MRAC once again to create a mandated reporting webpage specific to child abuse and neglect reporting. And I will pass it on to Jason now.
So yes, this is a exciting, very, very exciting to even be discussing community pathways, ways that families can be recommended to programming without having to go through the trauma of having a child welfare investigation or voluntary services, which is almost like, to me, a plea deal, where they offer, currently with funding, they can't really offer too much resources, but they can offer you surveillance for 6 months, and check-ins and more of a metric to make you fall deeper into the system. So with community pathways, we have the opportunity to get services that are friendly to the community, familiar to the community, and have people get the resources they need instead of that. So recommendation 11 required the Department of Social Services to incorporate an assessment of the capacity of community supports and services. Also, a big issue with this is getting more culturally competent services to be added to the clearinghouse, and make sure currently there's a lot of discussion about what's evidence-based and things like that. So there's a lot of changes that have to be made there, because there are trusted resources in a lot of our communities that we would go to, and with capacity, they would be able to handle more capacity if they were eligible for funding. So a lot of times we end up going
Is
through,
that which one you need to-
we end up going through community based organizations who kind of have a mandate of walking people through the system when a lot of lived experience professionals come into these roles and figure out families don't need to be walked through the system. A lot of as we develop our skills and learn about the policies and procedures and where those policies and procedures failed us as people with lived experience, we learn that, oh, this case could have been stopped during a multidisciplinary team. This did not need to go into an investigation. This didn't even need to go on to a child family team. It could have been stopped in a meeting of social workers. We learn about the documentation. We learn about all the bias that has been put into these documents before they're in front of a county council. So in my particular case, because I can't speak on the privacy of others, but in my particular case, I was documented as a gang member in my early teens, and this information was used against me in my 30s, in my mid 30s, with no criminal history to combine the two. And while this practice of documenting all the men in the neighborhood had already been debunked, several people had sued, one in federal court, lawsuits. So I was fortunate I was able to articulate these things, but a lot of times other people can't. These data points, once you get into the system, just random data points about you throughout your life are used against you. So with the community pathways won't even have access to that information. They'll be looking at you, they'll meet you where you're at and look at you now. They won't be digging into your history trying to find something, because if we all had a microscope into every moment of our lives, you're bound to find something. And if you're looking that hard at a practice that was targeted at a certain demographics, then it's going to raise the numbers of everything else. So very important recommendation 11, and also recommendation 12. With the community pathway recommendations, the California Department of Social Services will be required to ensure counties' comprehensive prevention plans will incorporate information and education specific to mandated reporters regarding the implementation and access to community pathways, and making sure community resources are available to support their families, because that's the main thing. When we have these discussions, we talk about funding. So as far as legislation and as far as your local communities, that's the main thing we need. We need support in these movements to make sure there's funding, and it'll reduce the trauma that our communities are experiencing. It'll bring these subjects out to public, to the light of day, and it won't be so taboo, won't be so hush, and families will experience a lot less shame. So next slide, please. And also, it's very important, the narrative shift. During my experience in the task force, it was a very healing process to go into a space with people from all different walks of life and all different parts of this system. You know, the system is just filled with people, regular people, and to have disagreements and see that the task force would hold itself accountable. The task force would hold people accountable who may not have seemed like they were there for the same goals. Through that process, the task force developed a lived experience group that I was proud to be a part of the founding decisions of that, and make sure that people with lived experience had a seat at the table, and that a lot of the recommendations that were coming through, we had a chance to analyze them and put our perspective and send it back to the professionals. So a lot of times people get intimidated by the concept of lived experience and coming into the workplace and having this priority in say or experience. That's not the case. I've learned so much from being around classically trained social workers. The hybrid of both of those experiences has enabled me to do so much in my work. So I would never just go with just lived experience. We still need people with the expertise in building programs and getting the funding and the structure. All of this is very necessary. So I just say to any of the workers in the room who are in charge of hiring, don't be afraid of hiring lived experts and empowering them. That's one of the key elements that's missing. Don't just take on lived experts far as checking off a box. Educate them, empower them, and you will see your engagement go up. You will see results. Next slide.
Thank you, Jason. So you have just heard a lot of recommendations and a lot of information. Where are we now? And we want to ensure that these recommendations don't just sit on a shelf. And where we are now is in September of 2024, the Child Welfare Council unanimously adopted the report from adopted and approved the report from the task force. And we are now working with various state departments, primarily with the with CDSS and through the Prevention Early Intervention Subcommittee of the Child Welfare Council to ensure that we move forward these recommendations. So we are really proud that all this work and this effort is going to move forward and in implementation. And we're going to talk a little bit about some things. You've heard a little bit of what has already happened, but where we are here. So the first was to stand up that MRAC, as I'm calling it, the committee that will oversee the recommendations and the ongoing implementation of reform of mandated reporting. That we have, so that MRAC, first was to have 3 tri-chairs, which were identified as ensuring that there's an individual with lived expertise as one of the tri-chairs, that there's somebody coming from the Child Welfare Council, so to really make sure we are partnering at the state level, and then also to bring in somebody who represents other child and family service systems, other community systems. Next slide, please. And what might that look like? So we are, as we're standing this up, what is the structure going to look like, and what is the composition of that MRAC going to look like? This slide has a lot of information on the right-hand side in that purple box. This really talks about the composition of this committee, and like the task force itself and the subcommittees, really in the creation of MRAC is an emphasis on ensuring diversity of voices, cross-discipline from various places in California, various counties, and really emphasizing that experience with child welfare and with the mandated reporting system. So the goal is that to have 50% of the members who have either been who have been impacted by mandated reporting, whether that's having lived experience with the system or having advocated to change the system. And then to make sure that there are representatives from certain disciplines like education, which is the top category of mandated reporters, from healthcare, from child welfare, from juvenile justice, from community organizations and advocates. So that was the premise of who's going to be on this committee. And how is it going to work? What's the structure? So as I mentioned, the committee, the MRAC, will sit within the Child Welfare Council and within the subcommittee of the Prevention and Early Intervention Committee. And there is a steering committee to be established for the MRAC. That steering committee will be made up of the tri-chairs of the MRAC, the co-chairs of the Prevention and Early Intervention Committee, and for the former task force co-chairs, as well as representatives from the essential California departments. And then finally, similar to how the task force was set up, there'll be working groups or subcommittees that are associated with those 5 levers of change that we mentioned before. Next slide. So we're excited. As I said, we are moving forward. This work is moving forward. And the first piece is have some already determined and appointed the 3 tri-chairs for the MRAC. Really, really amazing leaders in this field. Janae Eustace, who is the president and CEO of the CAP Center in Sacramento. Juan Solis, who is a father engagement coordinator in San Bernardino County, and Alicia Garupa, who is in LA County, and she's the chief of wellbeing and support services. So you even see here diversity of different parts of the state, different counties, as well as representing those different areas and disciplines. Next slide. And so I mentioned a little bit of, what was the hope for the composition of the MRAC. The application process first went out to former task force members and to subcommittee members. And the goal coming from those applications is to have 17 representatives from community organizations or providers, though many who have experience as mandated reporters. And then also because this is a partnership with the state to ensure that there are 9 seats for the various key departments at the state level, and then also 6 state association seats. And those are, different associations of the disciplines that are involved in mandated reporting, such as the California Welfare Directors Association. So that's the goal, and the goal is to have 32 members, as well as in addition to the tri-chairs. And I will turn it to you, Luciana, for other updates.
Thank you. And I will say, as of breaking news, that the MRAC members have been chosen at this time, and they are starting to meet upcoming in May. One of the things that we didn't mention is the Child Welfare Council approved the recommendations. But one of the things, a very important thing that the Child Welfare Council did was put the updates on this work on the regular agenda, like as a regular agenda item. So now when they meet quarterly, there will be an agenda item with an update on what's happening with the mandatory reporting to community supporting work. And those meetings are public. You can attend in person or Zoom in. Maybe it's not Zoom, maybe it's webinar or some digital way. And the agendas and the information are available online, so you can always log on if you're curious to know where the work is going and what's happening. Some other updates besides the MRAC, which was a big part of the task force recommendations. Under data and accountability, again, the tri-chairs, MRAC, the steering committee, everyone has been selected, and they are going to start doing their work, including examining data with the focus on general neglect and disproportionality, because data is a big part of the puzzle. Community pathways, there's going to be a push to start collecting and examine learnings from other counties who have started to implement these different kind of ways of supporting mandated reporters. Humboldt County, Los Angeles County, San Diego County have already started on some of this work. So looking at what counties are already doing to see what works and what doesn't. And also examining and learn from San Diego's community hubs. As far as policy, we saw today that AB 2085 has not been widely spread as far as knowledge, and it is a pretty substantial change for mandated reporters. So helping to support and provide guidance on the implementation of AB 2085 throughout the state and different counties. And continue to work with legislators to craft legislation. I mentioned in my piece that a lot of the recommendations in the areas I covered would require legislation, and there is legislation already pending in some of these areas. So continue to work with legislators to make sure that everybody's kind of aligned on what change we want to see happen. Training, working on statewide mandated reporter training has started. CDSS and the Office of OCAP has started convening folks to get feedback and information on the development of mandated reporter training. And of course, all of this, including this presentation, help to facilitate a narrative shift that leads the work forward. So continuing to work on disseminating information, including the task force recommendations. So a group of us have been attending different conferences and venues to make sure that everybody throughout the states knows about the work, knows about the movement, and is able to participate in any way they can. So here's a slide with the report itself, the QR code, as I mentioned earlier. You can scan it and you can read the full report if you didn't get enough from us today, but it's available in writing to you. If you also want to get involved in kind of the work that's happening in the state and the community of folks who are working on issues of mandated reporting and community pathways, you can scan the QR code and join the list and get all kinds of updates, and it's a platform where you can share information with others as well as get information from others throughout the state. And that is it for our official presentation, but we are happy to take any questions or comments from folks.
Luciana, I have a couple questions that have come in the Q&A as well as in the chat, so I'm happy to read those off. But of course, first, I want to say on behalf of the participants, thank you so much for sharing this information. I saw, quite a bit of thank yous coming through and some emojis, which are my favorite. So here are the questions in order that they were received. The first question is, do you know if any other states are also looking into this type of task force work, or is it just California at this point?
Yes, there are. So other states have looked at it already. And so I know Colorado, they have issued a report as well. I should have looked it up again. There's another state that issued a report along the time we did. Other states are joining along. I know Casey Family Programs convened a group back in December in Austin, Texas, which I was very fortunate to participate, and there was representatives from a bunch of different states talking about the work their own state has been doing. Texas has been really ahead of the game on legislation and has passed legislation narrowing the definition of general neglect and doing other things as well. They now have legislation pending on removing liability. So many folks are doing the work. It looks a little different from state to state. And I think in general, like I've connected with people from different states. People reach out to us. I just got a call from Minnesota. They're looking at doing something like 2085, so wanted to hear about it. So I think changes have been at least thought of in many different jurisdictions, and people are just kind of looking to learn from each other at this point.
That's great. Thank
And
you.
I'll just add to that I know it's been a helpful resource for me, but New York started, as Luciana said, states are doing it differently. New York started with reform of their training, and they published that online. It used to at least be online with their social services department, and their training is much more of a community supporting training. So it's helpful if you're looking for trainings in the meantime.
Yes, and I also just want to clarify, it was Maine who's looking at kind of 2085 reform, not Minnesota, the other another state, but it's Maine.
Great. There's another question in the chat. Just to clarify something that a comment from earlier, can you clarify what you mean that mandated reporter training is not required? It sounds like some people have a requirement for all providers since 2016. Can we clarify any of that?
So there's a huge list of who is a mandated reporter under the penal code. Not every one of those mandated reporters has a training requirement. Some do. Some categories of mandated reporters are required to be trained, but not all of them are legally required to be trained. And it could also be that their employer themselves require them to do it. But as far as legal requirement, not every single category mandated reporter is required right now to be trained.
Thank you for clarifying that. So it sounds like it may be role specific. All right, and then there was another question here. It was about funding, and they were just curious to know what does it look like to get support or funding for these important committees, projects? What does that typically look like?
I could jump in here. This task force was really unique in that it was a public-private partnership in some ways. And so some funding came through foundations, some funding came through community organizations. So you'll see in terms of publishing the report, Casey Family Programs was a huge leader on both the task force and the report and providing support and funding. Safe and Sound, we also had the opportunity to contribute some funding towards this. And then obviously there was tremendous in-kind support from California Department of Social Services, and there continues to be. So the task force itself was a public-private partnership. As this work goes forward, we're looking at how to structure that, but the hope is that this kind of diverse support will continue.
Wonderful. Great. There was a question. This one may be case specific, so feel free to let us know if this person should reach out to you or someone else. The question is, if a child is reporting to social services abuse from foster parent and the parent reported so many times to DCFS and there is nothing, no action being taken, what else can the parent do? Don't do anything about.
So this is very specific and it's also not necessarily related to mandated reporting. So like one of the things actually this question highlights is kind of the confusion between what happens at the mandated reporter stage of the game and the hotline stage of the game. So that we're talking about an issue with what's happening at the hotline and the hotline response, which again, oftentimes gets conflated, but it's two different kind of points in the system, right? I don't want to, the lawyer in me wants to give advice. I don't want to give legal advice on here.
It does look like there was Elizabeth Johnson did drop in there a link as well for future reference.
Perfect. I would, depending where you're calling from, I mean, everybody in California is entitled to an attorney. So if you're a social worker, you have your county counsel. If it's the minor's attorney should be contacted. If the parent should have attorneys. So I would suggest that folks reach out to their legal counsel.
Great. And I would also say that it's comments and questions that are specific and case specific kind of highlight the theme that it does take a village, that individuals sometimes need resources and need a next step. And so grateful to have a space like this where you've brought such valuable information. This webinar series has brought such valuable information. And what a great way to highlight that this work isn't done in a vacuum. It's done with a community of other professionals. So thank you so much. Wonderful. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I will give folks one moment to ask those questions. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen and just kind of give the folks, all of us, just some idea about next steps. What does this look like? You received some valuable content today. Of course, some experience from your presenters. They've provided some valuable resources to connect to and some next steps that might be the best step for you. All of that information has been recorded and will be not just provided to you in a 2-day follow-up email, but is also going to be added to our YouTube playlist. That playlist encompasses all of the sessions from this series and also will provide the resources that are associated to those series as well. A couple things. First, we want to just say thank you so much to you, Jenny, Jason, Luciana, for your information that you brought today and all of the hard work that it took to not just do the task force, but then put it together and share with us today. We also want to thank our interpreter, Carmen, for providing this information live time in Spanish. We want to thank all of the partners that came together as our own little task force to put this 2025 webinar series together. That, of course, would be the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, the Child Abuse Prevention Center, that would be the CAP Center, Safe and Sound, and lastly, the program I'm representing today, Caltrin, the California Training Institute. We'll be sending out all of those materials, recordings, and at the end of this session, which will be in just a few moments, there will be a brief survey. That brief survey will give you an opportunity to share about your experience. Thank you. It's in the chat right now. What was your experience like? Of course, to help us curate future experiences for webinar series. I will also say that next week, you don't want to miss it. It's the last in this month's series, outside of the rescheduled one in May. And it's going to be a lived expertise panel. As a matter of fact, someone that was mentioned earlier today, Juan Solis, will be a panelist on that call, and it will be happening April 30th. You can register in the chat, and it's also on your action sheet. All right. And with that,
Just
yes,
can
please.
I chime in really fast? Sorry, I
Absolutely.
need to rush back, but I don't want to leave anyone hanging. And I see Marina's put in a follow-up question as to the required training. I'll just say that childcare providers and employees are required. They're one of the ones who are currently required to take training. No specific training like under the law, but they are required. Their employers are required to have them trained.
Wonderful. All right. And with that, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We so look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you again to our panelists. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.